Frequent clashes in a fiery U.S. presidential election debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Both camps say they won after 90 minutes of sharp exchanges. So what impact will it have on undecided voters and on November's election? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I am Hashem Ahelbarra. Televised debates have rarely been so important in U.S. presidential election as now. The last head-to-head ended Joe Biden's campaign after a spectacular implosion against Donald Trump in June. Before shaking hands on the studio stage on Tuesday, Trump and Kamala Harris had never met before. Judging from the tone of the debate that followed, it's unlikely either would be rushing to meet each other again, if it wasn't for the matter of who should be U.S. president. For Vice President Harris, it was her first presidential debate, unlike Trump, who's fighting his third campaign. No catastrophic collapse for the Democrats. This time, her team says she won, just as Trump's side say their man came out on top. So how did they do? And what key topics emerged? And will this debate have any influence on the final outcome in November? Those are the questions we'll put to our guests shortly. But first, this report from Laura Khan.
Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate.
These U.S. presidential candidates are almost neck to neck in opinion polls, hoping that going head to head in a televised debate will seal their bid for the White House.
And his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing.
She doesn't have a plan. She copied Biden's plan.
Vice President Kamala Harris and former U.S. President Donald Trump challenged one another on domestic and foreign policy, with Israel's war on Gaza part of that debate.
Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. Children, mothers. What we know is that this war must end.
Trump saw this as an opportunity to attack Harris.
She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population because the whole place is going to get blown up.
And both candidates traded barbs at each other on issues including the right to abortion and the state of the economy, where Kamala says she will support emerging small businesses. Trump retorted she had no track record of doing this.
Donald Trump left us the worst unemployment since the Great Depression.
Trump pushed his usual stance against immigration further, claiming Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, were consuming pets.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats.
In a departure from previous debates, fact-checkers were on hand, checking or clarifying Trump's claims a few times.
There have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals.
Analysts are debating whether there was a clear winner, but what's not clear is whether this debate will convince undecided voters to take a side in the U.S. presidential election in November. Laura Khan for Inside Story, Al Jazeera.
Let's bring in our guests. They're all joining us from the United States. In Philadelphia, Eric Ham, U.S. political analyst and former congressional staffer. In Washington, D.C., Jennifer Victor, associate professor of political science at George Mason University's Schar School. In Minneapolis, Amy Koch, a Republican strategist who was the first female majority leader in Minnesota's state legislature. Welcome to the program. Eric, because the debate is essentially about allowing people decide who's going to be their choice for the presidential election. What did voters learn from the debate that they didn't know before?
Well, clearly going into the debate, the latest New York Times Santa poll showed that nearly 30% of voters who were polled in that poll clearly did not know much about Kamala Harris. And so Kamala Harris needed to be able to tell her story while also shaping a vision for the future. And that was so important last night. And also, while most of debates really do not actually shape elections, it's the optics that matter the most. And clearly what people are looking for is someone who they believe can be presidential and who can pass the commander-in-chief test. And that was what voters were looking for last night.
Okay, Jennifer, first presidential debate for Kamala Harris. Shall I say a sigh of relief for her and for the Democrats as well?
Probably. You know, in science, we like it when there's one variable that varies and everything else stays the same. So as a social scientist, we got to see something last night that was really unusual. We don't usually get to see in a presidential campaign, which is a second debate where one candidate stayed the same and the other one changed. And the contrast couldn't have been clearer. One of the things that I took away from last night was if in the first debate, it was very clear, not so much that Trump won, but that Biden very much lost, that one variable difference between then and now showed that in this debate, it seemed very clear that Kamala Harris was the dominant figure.
Amy, you know the way media characterizes the outcome of a debate. So basically, it's been widely seen as Kamala Harris won without delivering the knockout for Trump. How do you see that?
Yeah, that's what I see. Actually, her numbers coming out of the debate were not as good as even Secretary Clinton's coming out of their first debate. Both of them were decided victors in the debate. And I do think she handled herself very well. I do think she missed an opportunity because so many Americans don't really know who she is. She definitely knocked it out of the park. And when she was talking about domestic policy, when she was talking about reproductive rights. But I do feel like she needs to still let us know a little bit more, see her personality a little more, and let us know a bit more about her personally. But, you know, this really wasn't the forum. I think that she could do that. It was a miss on the CNN interview as well. I think there's more work that the team has to do there.
Eric, was her best performance, the best performance for Harris, the fact that she managed to go Trump into a corner. She never gave him a chance to present his own vision for what's happening next when he becomes president, spending most of his time trying to refute every single attack and barb against him.
No question, this was an implosion by Donald Trump, and it was certainly precipitated by Kamala Harris's goading of him, which we knew and expected she would do. However, because Kamala Harris coming into this debate had not done a lot of media interviews, had not been in a debate in 4 years, she was seen as the X factor. And clearly, I think people want to know more about her story. And I think what people perhaps would have wanted to hear was more about what, in fact, she did that was seen as a guiding theme for her during the Biden-Harris administration. How does she plan to actually take those policies that have been implemented, move them forward, but also weaving her narrative into that? Last night was certainly, I think, an audience for her to do that because it was a captive audience. Whether or not she did that, we won't know until people actually begin to respond to what took place last night.
Jennifer, she owned much of the debate. She dictated the terms of the evening. But did she manage to present her plan for the American people and particularly for the undecided voters?
You know, these debates are almost always measured against expectations. We go into them with particular kinds of expectations for the candidates, and then we see whether or not they met them. And going into this debate, I would say that for Harris, the expectations were very high. When Biden first tapped her as the nominee, she came out saying, I can prosecute the case against Donald Trump. And this was her first test about whether or not she could make good on that claim. And, you know, a campaign doesn't typically relish very high expectations for their candidate because it's so easy not to meet them. I would say that Trump also had fairly low expectations because that's kind of how we tend to treat Donald Trump. And even with those expectations set, I would say that Harris met them. She was prepared, she was strategic, she was sincere. She had a clear, prepared strategy in which she would deliver these substantive remarks that were mixed in with this bait that she knew he would not be able to let alone. And in the end, that means I think Trump had more speaking time overall in the debate. And that did not harm Harris at all.
Amy, when you are on the defensive, as Trump was, you basically have to accept that you will receive more and more punches. Do you think that this was a missed opportunity for Donald Trump?
No, so I actually think this was the best I've seen him, and I've not been a big fan of Donald Trump in debates. He was more prepared. He frankly won the discussion of the economy and on foreign policy, and he was driving the discussion there. I think where people are seeing this as a win one, she was definitely stronger on domestic and reproductive rights. Those are going to be the areas that she's going to be the strongest. However, on immigration, which should have been his issue, which he should have owned, she did pull him out, distract him with discussions about his rallies. And then he had this whole, sort of crazy old man diatribe about Ohio and people eating dogs. And that's what's being remembered. But watching the foreign policy discussion of Ukraine and Israel, he was on. They tried to bait him into picking a side in Ukraine, and he said, I want the war to end. That's the right answer. And on the economy, I was like, oh, this is a different man. It's just that Donald Trump gets in Donald Trump's way, and he really did in a huge way on an issue that should have been his strength.
Eric, you said earlier that Harris knew beforehand that the expectations are high and people wanted to know more about her. But you see, this is the problem. When it comes to substance and the moment when she should have talked more about why she's been flip-flopping on some of the decisions, more sense of clarity about her positions when it comes to border crossing, fracking, and so on and so forth. She was not really that elaborate on those particular issues. Do you think they will come to haunt her in the next debate?
No, not at all. And I think we have to actually speak about this. Look, this whole idea of flip-flop, that was certainly used to great effect during the 2004 election when George W. Bush used it against John Kerry. But I think to actually have a candidate, have anybody who actually just kind of evolves over time on their issues and their thinking, I think that's something that should be rewarded, not actually attacked. But if we want to look at how, in fact, this debate played last night, all you had to do was go inside the spin room in the debate hall after the debate took place. And none other than Donald Trump himself actually showed up saying that there were immediate polls showing that he overwhelmingly won the debate. And clearly what he was doing was trying to actually spin the narrative that he actually had won, which clearly was not the case. And so I think what we saw last night was this was a debacle, no way around it for Donald Trump. And I think coming out of that, it could be potentially consequential because we know the margins between both of these candidates going into the election were so razor thin.
I think, Jennifer, one of the highlights of the debate was basically the reaction of Kamala Harris, particularly when Trump was making those outlandish remarks about immigrants eating pets. But can I ask you a question about a polarized nation where ultimately Trump does understand very well that he has a strong power base, a support base that will ultimately trust him? So fact-checking, does it make any difference?
I think it's important to keep in mind that debates are a very sort of traditional way that we do campaigns and campaign politics in the United States. We used to have a whole commission on presidential debates that would pre-negotiate and pre-organize these things, and it was all on a schedule, and we knew about the debates before even the candidates were settled sometimes. And we don't have that anymore. And the reason we don't have that anymore is because Donald Trump refused to go along with that system. Donald Trump is a populist-style candidate that does not play to the norms of regular politics. And so we put him now in a venue, a debate, that is a traditional style, and he's a non-traditional candidate. So it doesn't surprise me at all that we wind up with sort of him doing his regular outlandish thing, Harris doing her much more measured, traditional, sort of expert thing, and the contrast comes off quite starkly. So I think that yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Amy, if I were an undecided voter from North Carolina, I would be more interested in learning more about Trump's plan for a second term. Now, when I see him being baited into reacting angrily to most of the comments made by Kamala Harris, then I would say, I'm not really impressed.
The thing with former President Trump is all of that is baked in. And so we sort of take it, I'm sorry to say, as it comes, because that's what it is. And so being a non-traditional candidate, which I completely agree with, those kind of rules do not apply. Trump has a woman problem. Trump has a problem that if women turn out in kind of the quiet, power numbers that they did in 2022, he's got an issue. On the other side, Vice President Harris is hemorrhaging men, and not just white men, men of color as well. And so they're going to have to shore that up. And if either of those candidates succeed or fail in those areas, that's the ball game.
Okay, Eric, what do you think happens next? Are we going to see a momentum building in favor of Kamala Harris, or do you think Trump still has a strong chance?
I think this is interesting in terms of what we see coming out of that debate, because I think going into the debate, I think the latest polls were showing that perhaps Kamala Harris's campaign was beginning to hit a wall in terms of these large rallies that were, in fact, building momentum and seeing record fundraising as well. And now, given the success that she had last night, perhaps we will see a new phase of this campaign where you begin to see Kamala Harris do more interviews where she is engaging and telling more about her story, but more importantly, what her plans are for the country if, in fact, she's elected. And the reason I say that is because clearly last night, what we saw from Kamala Harris was she continued to go back to this narrative of her coming from this middle class family. And so clearly she was recognizing that she needed to do more to tell her story. And I think now that she recognizes that, we could see a new phase of her campaign where she tries to do more and connecting who she is to the American people to actually build a base, very much like what we see with Donald Trump.
Jennifer, Hillary Clinton won the 2 debates against Trump, but she lost the election. Could this give us any lesson about what could happen in the upcoming weeks?
Yeah, I mean, certainly one of those lessons is Democrats should not be overconfident. All evidence that we have suggests that this is going to be a close election. We live in a very hyper-polarized partisan environment in the United States. We do not use a popular vote. And so this election is going to come down to, perhaps less than 100,000, maybe more than that, but not very many votes across 5 or 6 states, perhaps. So that sort of knife edge kind of result that we've seen in the last couple of elections that we should probably expect again because of the way partisanship is organized now suggests to me that we are going to see, this is going to remain heated until the end. And I do, there's no reason to think that this is going to be some kind of blowout or one of the candidates is going to start sitting back or acting like they've already lost. That being said, it's been very interesting in the last week to hear Donald Trump on the campaign trail making statements that are seeding doubt in election administration. He's sort of already talking about making false claims about mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania and so forth. So this is definitely anti-democratic behavior that seeds out in election administration. That is not at all what we want to see in healthy democracies. And it suggests that he is already crafting a plan for if he loses that might make where he might react similarly to how he did in 2020. And that's very concerning.
Amy, one of the strong punchlines by Harris when she reminded Trump that he was fired by 81 million voters. And she did that for a reason. She wanted to remind people of the claims that he made of widespread election fraud and the mobs that attacked the Capitol Hill in January the 6th, 2021. Do you think this episode is likely to haunt him in the upcoming weeks?
I don't see that. Again, I don't think these are new claims by Donald Trump. They're erroneous and wrong, and he should be quiet about them, but he's been making those since 2020. And so I don't think that's going to impact that, although I understand why the Harris campaign wants to, continually bring it up, and they should. It's a fair attack. However, I really think that Americans right now, all polling is showing we're concerned about inflation. We're concerned about the economy. We're concerned about immigration. These are the issues that are coming up. And the candidates would do well to focus on what they're going to do about those things. And frankly, the better argument last night for economy was President Trump, and the better immigration win was Vice President Harris. So we'll see.
Eric, if we are to move forward now, and let's talk about both candidates tied now in the polls. Who is likely to define the future and particularly the outcome of the election? Do you think that the battleground states are likely to deliver the final decision?
Oh, absolutely. And I think there's no bigger prize than where I am right now in Pennsylvania. This is the epicenter right now of this election. Who wins Pennsylvania will likely win this election. And what both of these candidates had to do last night was speak to that very small sliver of voters in these key battleground states. Clearly, Kamala Harris needed to be able to pass that commander-in-chief test, and Donald Trump needed to show that he could be a stable force if, in fact, he is returned to the White House. Clearly, those were the questions that both of the candidates had going into the last night's debate. It's unclear how voters overall saw what took place last night, but clearly this is going to be a razor thin election. And also, just very quickly, we still need to talk about the role that the moderators played last night, because they were very effective, I think, in holding both of the candidates to their positions, and also fact checking specifically on Donald Trump, which is something we did not see last debate.
Jennifer, now, Democratic strategists now are looking at the map of the swing states: Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. If Harris is to seal the deal and win the election, where do you think she will have to fare better as far as those states are concerned?
I think I heard you throw Florida in that mix, and that one threw me a little bit. The polling that I've looked at suggests, as my co-panelist just said, that Pennsylvania is probably the big prize. Whoever wins Pennsylvania, that's likely to be a tipping point state at this point. Although we're still 54 days out, that could change between now and Election Day. That's just where we are right now. But also Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, these are critical states for Democrats to win if they're going to win the election. And Arizona and Nevada are also very close states and big prizes to win. And throwing Georgia into that mix, and sometimes North Carolina. These are the 7 states that are most critical. And in reality, this is where the election is taking place. Hundreds, 50 million Americans or something like that are going to cast ballots. But it is the, few million in those 7 states where this is going to turn out to be decisive. And one of the effects of that is that if you don't win a swing state, you're not getting as much campaign at your face, which some may enjoy. But it can also be disaffecting for voters. It can be demotivating. And we talk in political science about a lack of personal efficacy with respect to elections and politics and representation. And that's pretty problematic for democracies. And so thinking of ways of engaging broader voters, thinking about down-ballot races, encouraging people to think of voting as a community-level activity rather than something they just do for themselves, I think is really important.
Amy, 63% of Americans say that abortion should be legal in all or most of America. Kamala Harris knows that this is pretty much Trump's vulnerable area. Is she likely to further tap into it in the upcoming weeks? Because she knows she could hurt him badly when it comes to particularly the issue of abortion.
When it comes to reproductive health and women's health in general, as well, I think he's incredibly vulnerable, although he has shored up his response on the IVF, I think, in a better way. But no, this is what the Trump campaign has to be mindful of, and where the Harris campaign are going to push, because sort of driving what happened in 2022, a replay of that election where women really didn't show polls, but just quietly came out and voted for the Democrats. That's what they're looking for on that. Conversely, she has her fracking answers and her energy answers were terrible and will not play well in those key states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. We have 3 minutes, and I appreciate we can talk about other aspects, particularly foreign policy, which we know is not going to be hugely impacting the outcome of the election. But I would like to start first asking Eric about the strong exchanges when we saw about Ukraine and Gaza. Are they going to resonate among some of the undecided voters?
I think they will play only at the margins, particularly the war in Gaza. We know Michigan has a very large Palestinian Arab American population, and so they are clearly fired up around the issue. I want to go back to something that you brought up when you mentioned the state of Florida. And I think what we're seeing with the Harris campaign is something we typically don't see from Democratic presidential campaigns. And I think Harris perhaps recognizes that state might be a bridge too far, but also recognizes that there is a potential to actually pick up a Senate seat there. And when you look at how vulnerable Senator John Tester, the Democrat, is in Montana, I think Kamala Harris recognizes that even if she's elected president of the United States, not having Democrats in Congress and controlling both chambers of Congress could prove difficult to actually get her policies passed. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why we're seeing her play aggressively in places like North Carolina, Florida, and also why she has actually transferred more than $25 million to many of these down-ballot races. So when we talk about a whole-of-government approach to policy, I think what we're seeing here is a whole-of-politics approach to the election, recognizing that it cannot just be Kamala Harris that gets elected. It has to be Democrats all up and down the ballot.
Jennifer, shortly, if you don't mind, do you think that Harris managed to convince the Americans that she's going to be a strong commander-in-chief if elected?
This is really interesting because if she's elected, she'll be the first female president. And the idea of a female as commander-in-chief has been a barrier for some folks. Mm-hmm. And I thought her foreign policy answers last night were frankly extremely strong. It was one of her first times talking in that kind of public venue about foreign policy. And she really was able to demonstrate and articulate to Americans why NATO is important, and then to attack her opponent by associating himself with authoritarian dictators.
Amy, you remember exactly that point when she associated him with the dictators and saying that his election could further erode a long-standing tradition of strong international political order, particularly Trump saying in the past that he's willing to abandon the alliance with NATO. Those issues, do you think they will be big players in this election?
No, I don't think there'll be large players. And the problem for Vice President Harris is that she can say what she wants, but she will be continuously tied to the foreign policy of her administration, of the Biden-Harris administration. And that's just been has been difficult. It's been terrible. Whether it's Israel, Ukraine, even the withdrawal from Afghanistan, I think she's very vulnerable on this point. And so she might have had some, kind of quippy remarks on it last night, but the substance is going to be a problem for her.
Interesting times ahead, and we're likely to wait for the upcoming weeks to see how this is going to further evolve and what the Americans are going to see and who is going to be elected as next president. Eric Ham, Jennifer Victor, Amy Koch, I really appreciate your insight and looking forward to talking to you in the near future. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.